acsportstips.com, continuing our week 1 analysis of all the college football action. We were calling for the upset. Toledo on the road in the desert facing Rich Rod and the Arizona Wildcats, and we almost got it. The game went into overtime, and Arizona prevails 24-17. The Wildcats missed a field goal from 26 yards out with 2 seconds left, and we thought that we were right with the Rockets pulling out the victory, but Rich Rod prevails. Senior Matt Scott had a great game. He threw for over 300 yards, and the Wildcats seem to have bought into Rich Rod's system in week 1, over 600 yards of total offense. Defensively, they did what it took to contain the Rockets, holding them to 17 points. A lot of holes on defense that Rich Rod had to fill, and that was a concern of ours going into this game. Well, it looks like they did what it took, and they made the proper adjustments, at least in week 1, to get the W. So hats off to Rich Rod. They can be, a pretty good team in the Pac-12. Not great. We still think that, there are other teams, Oregon, USC, obviously the creme de la creme of the Pac-12, but maybe Rich Rod can, make some significant improvements off of last year. They did have some concerns coming in, and at least in week 1, they seem to have addressed those. Hats off to Northwestern, which in the game of the day in our minds pulls out an unbelievable victory, 42-41. It seems like every year Syracuse has these wild games to start the year. I can remember back in 1998, I'm a huge college football fan, back in 1998 with the University of Tennessee coming into the Carrier Dome and T. Martin pulling out the victory. Back in 1994, it happened again with the University of Oklahoma and Gerald Moore and running backs James Allen. Oklahoma jumped out to an early lead and had to hold on to kick a field goal at the end to beat Syracuse. You remember back about 4 years ago, Brian Caputo and Eric Decker with the University of Minnesota on week 1, in OT upsetting the Orangemen. So it just seems like every year the Orangemen, they give up the early lead. They look like they're dead and buried, and then they come back to take the lead, and then they lose it on a heartbreaker. Ryan Nassib, senior quarterback, had a great game. He threw all over the field in the second half, third and fourth quarters. The Orangemen were up 41-36 and got a questionable call on Northwestern quarterback Kane Coulter, a personal foul call, which brought the Wildcats into scoring range, and they get the victory on the late touchdown pass by Kane Coulter to go up 42-41. So the best game in our minds of the day. I want to talk a little bit more about Georgia. We do believe that they were looking ahead to this week's matchup. Junior quarterback, Aaron Murray missed some throws early in that matchup to Tavares King, and he didn't look sharp in the passing game. And Murray's a guy, he has a great ability, and he showed that over the course of last year. But to make the next step as a quarterback, he has to make his reads, and it seems to me that he forces balls into coverage at times. Hopefully this year he improves on that, because in order for the Bulldogs to maintain their top 10 ranking, they're going to need Aaron Murray to mature as a quarterback, and obviously he's got a great offensive mind in head coach Mark Richt, who established Matthew Stafford and great quarterbacks. So if anybody can do it, it's Richt. But Aaron Murray starting the season a little off in that game, so we're curious to see how he does against the University of Missouri. We think that the Bulldogs will give it their best effort in week 2, offensively and defensively. Obviously, they did have a great effort by freshman Gurley. He returned the kickoff, had over 100 yards rushing, and they're going to need him with the loss of, obviously, Isaiah Crowell, who was kicked off the team this year. So we got to keep an eye on Georgia. Want to break down a little bit more. Hats off to the MAC. MAC never gets as much credit as they should. Ohio gets the victory over Penn State. Toledo almost knocks off Arizona. Western Michigan struggled a little bit against Illinois, but still kept the game close. the MAC is a very underrated conference year in and year out, and we just want to give credit where it's due. The MAC is a stronger conference than people really believe, and the average college football fan doesn't really know. The MAC conference is a solid conference, can play with the big boys on any given day. Chip Kelly, hey. I mean, what can you say about Oregon? They're up 50-10 at the half. DeAnthony Thomas with a great game, and Chip Kelly looks like he held back in the second half. They could have scored 100, it looked like, on Arkansas State. And Gus Malzahn, in his debut as head coach there from Auburn, Gus Malzahn kept it close in the second half. His Arkansas State team dropping to Oregon. Barkley and top-ranked USC looked sharp against Hawaii in their quest for the national championship this year. They jumped off on their first play of the game, and Barkley, with the long pass to start the game to Marquise Lee. They're a team to be reckoned with, but we still feel like the SEC is the best conference, hands down, with the Alabama victory over Michigan and the way Tennessee seemed to handle NC State. In our minds, talent-wise, on the defensive side of the ball, defensively, nobody can stay with the SEC. So we're going to break down the Week 2 matchups for Week 2 a little bit later. But right now, we just want to talk about a couple of players, individual players that made an impression on us in Week 1. Stephen Morris for the University of Miami. Quarterback Stephen Morris looked sharp against Boston College. He didn't get off to a good start, but as the game went on, he seemed to get into his rhythm, and Stephen Morris had a very good game on Week 1. They travel on the road. That's the University of Miami, and Al Golden picks up the victory 41-32 on the road against BC. They play Kansas State this week in Week 2, which is an intriguing matchup. They lost the University of Miami last year. On the last play of the game, they were stopped at the goal line by the Wildcats. Now they travel to Manhattan, Kansas, to take on Bill Schneider and the upstart Wildcats. Last year, Bill Schneider, Coach of the Year. Quarterback Colin Klein, with the option and the zone read, could be a problem, but it looks like the University of Miami could be back to where they are competitive again. They had an off year. It was a rebuilding year for Al Golden, and Stephen Morris seems to be a key component to that in week 1. So Stephen Morris looked like the vertical passing game was there, and the linebacking core for Miami seemed to be flying to the football. And this is a team that we're interested in Week 2. So see how the game plays out. We'll have a breakdown of that game a little bit later in the week. So stay with us all season long at www.acsportstips.com.